What if I told you that stupidity isn't just a lack of intelligence, but something way more dangerous? Imagine a force that can hijack even the brightest minds, turning them into agents of chaos, without them even realizing it. What if the biggest threat to society isn't evil people doing evil things, but everyday people, good, smart people, who've simply stopped thinking? Think about this. A highly respected scientist suddenly starts pushing conspiracy theories. A kind-hearted teacher begins promoting ideas that hurt the very students they care about. A loving parent makes choices that put their child in harm's way. They're not evil. They're not dumb. They're not malicious. They're just caught in something deeper. Something German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer once called the power of stupidity. And here's the part that really hits hard. It's not just happening to them. It's happening to people like you, like me, like anyone. Now, this isn't just some armchair theory. In fact, there's real science behind it. Back in 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram ran one of the most disturbing experiments ever at Yale University. Here's what happened. Volunteers were told by a man in a lab coat to deliver electric shocks to another person. They thought it was just a test. But when they pressed those buttons, they heard the other person scream in pain. And they didn't stop, even when they thought the shocks could be fatal. 65% of the participants kept going. Not because they were sadists, not because they were mentally unstable, but because they had stopped thinking for themselves. They handed over their judgment to someone in authority. And that moment, the moment they stopped questioning, was all it took. Bonhoeffer saw this same terrifying pattern up close. He lived through Nazi Germany, and it shattered his faith in human reason. This led him to one of the darkest, most unsettling conclusions about human nature ever written. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Think about that for a second. Not evil, stupidity. You can fight evil with reason, with resistance, with protest. But stupidity? It thinks it's doing good. It believes it's right. And that makes it nearly impossible to defeat. So let me ask you something personal. Have you ever believed something just because everyone around you believed it? 2. Keep that in mind, because that one question might unlock a truth that explains a lot more than you realize. Bonhoeffer wasn't some academic tucked away in a university. He was a German Lutheran pastor, raised in a brilliant intellectual family. His father was a leading psychiatrist and neurologist. He believed deeply in logic, education, and rational debate. But when the Nazis came to power, he watched in horror as those very tools, education, culture, faith, crumbled before raw ideology. And it wasn't just the uneducated masses. It was professors, doctors, priests, writers, people with influence and intellect. Bonhoeffer called it an intellectual surrender. And here's the part that really scared him. They weren't forced. They chose it. From his prison cell in 1943, awaiting execution for his involvement in a plot to kill Hitler, Bonhoeffer wrote something haunting. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Neither protests nor force can touch it. Reasoning falls on deaf ears. He wasn't being dramatic. He was being precise. Because unlike evil, which often triggers guilt or resistance, stupidity walks around feeling righteous. It smiles. It comforts. It reassures. And that's why it spreads so easily, because it feels good. Even worse, Bonhoeffer realized that stupidity doesn't just happen randomly. It's not about IQ. It's not about being uneducated. It's about how power operates. When people in charge don't want you to think critically, they don't have to silence you. They just have to make it hard for you to think clearly. And if you've ever felt too tired, too busy, or too overwhelmed to question what you're hearing, congratulations. You've already felt the edge of this trap. Let's clear something up. When Bonhoeffer used the word stupidity, he wasn't talking about low intelligence. He wasn't insulting people. He was describing a condition, what today we might call functional stupidity or willful ignorance. Here's how he explained it. In conversation with a stupid person, one feels like you're not talking to a person, but to slogans and catchphrases that have taken hold of them. Let that sink in. You're not arguing with a person. You're arguing with the algorithm in their head. Bonhoeffer's brilliance was that he saw this before social media, before 24/7 news cycles, before comment sections turn into battlegrounds. He understood that stupidity isn't always about a personal flaw. It's often a survival strategy. When you're overwhelmed, stressed, drowning in work, and constantly bombarded with information, you stop thinking critically. You rely on shortcuts. You go with the crowd. Economists even have a name for it: rational ignorance. Why spend energy understanding something complex when it's easier and often safer to just go along? And that's how societies fall into collective delusion. Not because people are evil, but because people are tired, distracted, overloaded. Bonhoeffer saw this in Germany. We're living it now. Let's get scientific for a second. In the 1950s, psychologist Leon Festinger introduced the idea of cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we feel when new information clashes with what we already believe. And you know what most people do when that happens? They reject the new information, not because it's wrong, but because it's uncomfortable. Now combine that with today's digital overload. Social media, 24/7 news, constant notifications. We're not wired for this. Our brains evolved to make fast, simple decisions, not to hold multiple complex truths at once. And that's why Bonhoeffer's idea is more important now than ever. Stupidity is not a psychological problem. It is a sociological one. It's not just about how people think. It's about how groups influence what we're willing to think. Back in 1950s, another psychologist, Solomon Asch, ran an experiment. He asked people to answer simple questions about the length of lines on a card. But here's the trick. Everyone else in the room was a plant, giving clearly wrong answers. And what happened? 75% of participants gave the wrong answer at least once, just to fit in. That's the terrifying part. Even when we know the truth, we'll deny it, if it means we don't have to stand out. Now imagine what happens in the age of social media echo chambers. You're constantly surrounded by opinions that reflect your own. Algorithms feed you more of what you already believe. And suddenly, being wrong starts to feel normal. Let's bring this into the present moment. Have you ever scrolled through your social media feed and noticed that it shows you exactly what you want to see? That's not random. That's design. These platforms aren't just entertaining you. They're shaping your reality. A 2018 study from MIT found that false information spreads 6 times faster than the truth on social platforms. Why? Because falsehoods are usually simpler, more emotionally satisfying, and easier to digest than complex truths. When something confirms our worldview, we're far more likely to click, share, and engage. And guess what? That's exactly what the algorithm wants. The more emotionally reactive you are, the more time you spend on the app. The more time you spend, the more ads you see. And the more ads you see, the more money they make. It's a perfect system for spreading stupidity. Not because anyone's trying to make you dumb, but because the system rewards intellectual shortcuts. Bonhoeffer didn't live to see this future, but he would have recognized it instantly, because he saw the same dynamic in Nazi Germany. Educated, thoughtful people trading in their independent thinking for emotionally satisfying lies. The only difference? Now it's happening faster, wider, and more invisibly than ever before. And this isn't just about Nazi Germany or modern algorithms. We've seen this pattern play out over and over again in history. Think about the Salem witch trials. Those weren't carried out by bloodthirsty monsters. They were regular church-going folks who genuinely believed they were protecting their community. Or the Red Scare during the 1950s. Americans, ordinary, patriotic citizens, turning against each other in the name of protecting democracy from communism. Each time, the same pattern repeats. Well-meaning people, swept up in fear, conforming to the group, abandoning their own judgment, and doing real harm in the process. When fear and pressure take over, critical thinking gets thrown out the window. But if the problem is baked into our systems and our biology, how do we resist it? Bonhoeffer believed it starts with something he called costly grace. It means being willing to think for yourself, even when it's painful, unpopular, or dangerous. Let's be real, this isn't easy, because now we're not just fighting peer pressure or bad news headlines. We're up against millions of years of evolution and billion-dollar algorithms that are literally designed to hijack your attention. So what can you actually do? Start small. Psychologists talk about something called intellectual humility, the ability to admit you might be wrong. And not just once, over and over again. Because let's face it, none of us know everything. Our beliefs are always incomplete, and sometimes totally off base. Here are a few simple practices that can protect your brain in a world that's trying to hack it. Practice intellectual friction. Once a week, read or listen to someone you disagree with. Not to win an argument, but to test your own ideas. Can they hold up under pressure? Embrace productive ignorance. When you feel absolutely certain about something, stop and ask, what would it take to change my mind? If your answer is nothing, that's a red flag. Pause before you post. Before sharing anything online, take 60 seconds to verify it from an independent source. That tiny delay breaks the algorithm's grip on your emotions. Say, I don't know. When you're unsure, be honest. In a world full of loud certainty, admitting you don't know is a radical act of clarity. These aren't heroic moves. They're small, everyday practices. But when most people stop thinking, doing the basics becomes powerful. Now, individual effort is crucial, but it's not the whole picture. Bonhoeffer knew that stupidity wasn't just personal. It was structural. So yes, we need to fight for internal freedom, but we also need to demand external reform. That means requiring social media companies to be transparent about how they curate content, funding media literacy campaigns that teach people how to evaluate information, designing online platforms that reward honest thinking over tribal shouting, creating economic policies that reduce stress and financial fear so people actually have the energy and space to think deeply. Because let's be honest, it's hard to focus on moral clarity when you're worried about paying rent or affording healthcare. Bonhoeffer might have called this the battle between noise and conscience. And right now, the noise is winning. Here's where things get even scarier. Bonhoeffer wrote about propaganda during a time when it was printed in newspapers or broadcast over radio waves. But we're living through something far more advanced. We're dealing with AI, deepfakes, and algorithms that know exactly how to trigger your brain. Every click, every pause, every comment, it's all being tracked. Not just to sell you stuff, but to map out your emotional patterns and feed you more of what you react to. That's not just manipulation. It's precision-engineered mind control at scale. And it's not targeting stupid people. It's targeting everyone. Because the scariest part is this. You don't need to be ignorant to fall into functional stupidity. You just need to be overwhelmed, scared, or tired. Which, let's be honest, is most of us. We saw this happen during the COVID-19 pandemic. Doctors, engineers, lawyers, people trained to think critically, suddenly spreading conspiracy theories, rejecting basic science. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they were under massive pressure and they stopped thinking clearly. Bonhoeffer didn't just talk about independent thinking. He lived it, and he paid for it with his life. On April 9th, 1945, just weeks before Germany surrendered, Bonhoeffer was executed by hanging in a concentration camp. His final words to a fellow prisoner, "This is the end, for me, the beginning of life." That wasn't just about faith. It was about commitment. Commitment to the idea that thinking clearly, even in the face of death, was worth it. Bonhoeffer understood something most of us forget. When people stop thinking for themselves, they stop being fully human. They become tools, puppets, shells, moved by the loudest voice, the strongest force, or the most viral post. And that's the heart of his terrifying question. Who stands fast? Who refuses to go along with the crowd? Who chooses truth when it's unpopular? Who keeps thinking when everyone else is just reacting? The answer isn't found in your GPA, your degrees, or your job title. It's found in the daily choices you make when nobody's watching. To stay curious, to ask questions, to pause before speaking, to say, I might be wrong. Here's the good news. You don't have to be a hero to fight this. You don't need to march in the streets or write a manifesto. You just need to think deliberately, honestly, consistently. That alone is an act of rebellion. Because the truth is, thinking is hard. It's uncomfortable to hold conflicting ideas in your head. It's painful to admit when you're wrong. It's lonely to resist groupthink. But that discomfort, that friction, it's the cost of staying human. When everyone around you is reacting with emotion, retreating into certainty, or chasing the comfort of simple answers, your decision to stay curious becomes a radical act. That's what Bonhoeffer understood. That's what he died defending. And that's what makes his theory of stupidity so powerful, because it's not just a diagnosis. It's a challenge. Now here's the part most people miss. You are not immune. I'm not. Nobody is. The moment you think, I could never fall for that, you're already falling. Because functional stupidity doesn't scream at you. It doesn't come with flashing lights. It whispers. It shows up in comfort, in ease, in a warm glow of being right all the time. It tells you, you've already figured it out. No need to dig deeper. And that's the trap. Because the price of mental freedom, the price of staying awake, is constant effort. Not against some external enemy, but against the part of yourself that just wants things to be easy. We see this everywhere. Smart people believing obviously false things. Educated individuals supporting harmful policies. Well-meaning citizens defending values that go against their own best interests. It's not that people are getting dumber. It's that our systems reward stupidity more than they reward thought. Quick takes over deep dives. Hot takes over careful questions. Loyalty over logic. But here's where the hope lives. If stupidity is partly chosen, it can also be unchosen. If it's structural, it can be restructured. If it's the result of overwhelm, we can design environments that make thinking easier, not harder. Think of it like exercise. You don't run a marathon without training. You don't build strength without lifting something heavy over and over again. Critical thinking works the same way. You don't just have it or not have it. You practice it. And if you don't, those muscles atrophy. They get weak. And eventually, you won't even notice that you've stopped thinking. So here's a practical test. Next time you feel absolutely certain about something. Next time you scroll past an article that makes your blood boil. Next time you dismiss someone just because they disagree with you. Stop, take a breath, and ask, what if I'm wrong? Not because you are, but because asking that question keeps your mind alive. So now, here's a question Bonhoeffer leaves us with. One that's more relevant today than ever. Will you keep thinking, even when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, or costly? Because in a world that profits from your intellectual surrender, the simple act of pausing to ask questions becomes the most important thing you can do. So here's a challenge. This week, take one belief you hold strongly. Spend just 30 minutes reading the best arguments against it. Not to change your mind, not to punish yourself, but to train your mental muscle, to build the habit of independent thought. If your belief survives, great. Now it's stronger. If it doesn't, you've just learned something valuable. And that's a win, too. If this video made you question something you thought you knew, if it made you uncomfortable or made you pause and think twice before hitting share, that's not a weakness. That's not confusion. That's not self-doubt. That's the beginning of intellectual courage. Because when everyone around you is chasing certainty, shouting over nuance, and clinging to groupthink, just stopping to reflect becomes a radical act. And if Bonhoeffer were alive today, he'd probably say this. The world doesn't need louder opinions. It needs braver questions. So ask more of them. Out loud. Online. In your conversations. Ask the things that don't have easy answers. Challenge the things that feel too obvious. Sit with the tension instead of sprinting toward resolution. Because that discomfort, that's where growth begins. If this message resonates with you, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it. But share it with purpose, not to prove a point or to own someone in the comments. Share it with someone who thinks, someone who's willing to have a deep conversation, even when it's tough. Because when you surround yourself with people who question, who wrestle with ideas, who dare to think independently, you create a ripple effect. That ripple becomes a current. That current becomes change. In a world that thrives on intellectual surrender, the simple act of thinking out loud, honestly and openly, becomes a kind of resistance. Let's be clear. Bonhoeffer's warning isn't just a piece of historical philosophy. It's a mirror held up to our present moment. We live in an age where manipulation is subtle, seductive, and everywhere, where algorithms are trained to feed our fears, where complexity is flattened into outrage, where conformity feels safer than curiosity. And most terrifying of all, you won't even know it's happening, because functional stupidity doesn't feel like stupidity. It feels like confidence. It feels like comfort. It feels like being on the right side. But deep down, it's a quiet surrender. The good news? Every day, in every moment, you get to choose again. You can choose to be curious instead of certain. You can choose to ask the hard questions. You can choose to slow down instead of react. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about being smart. It's about staying human. So here's what I want to leave you with. What's one belief you're willing to question this week? Just one. Not to tear yourself apart, not to fall into doubt, but to strengthen your ability to think independently. Let me know in the comments. Let's create a space, not of noise, but of thoughtful resistance. Let's be the kind of people who stand fast when everyone else has stopped thinking. And remember, every time you choose evidence over emotion, curiosity over certainty, careful thinking over quick reactions, you're not just protecting your own mind. You're defending the very possibility of human wisdom in an age of artificial stupidity. Thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking. Now let's keep going.